Welcome back. You're listening to Cindy Laverty Show on CRN Digital Talk Radio. Thanks for joining me today. My guests are Alan and Linda Anderson. They are the authors of a new book, Animals and the Kids Who Love Them, Extraordinary True Stories of Hope, Healing, and Compassion. And if you just want to feel good about animals, or if you're thinking about, could an animal bring joy to my child's life, or your life for that matter, pick up a copy of this book. Alan, Linda, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
If you want to share a story about your special animal, you can give us a call at 800-336-2225. That's 800-336-2225. Okay. You have really amazing stories in your book. We'll get to this fear thing with kids later on and how that happens. Linda, do you have a favorite one that just really touched you? I'd like to hear from both of you on this because I'm sure it's not the same story.
Oh, gosh, that's like a favorite child, right?
Well, there has to be one that just really touched you.
Well, I think one of my favorites is it's called A Cat Therapist for David.
Uh-huh.
And in that story, this little boy who was born with Down syndrome, there was the family had a Maine Coon cat, and those are, if you've ever seen one of those, they are very big cats.
They're great, big, huge, like little dogs.
Yes, they were, and they were. The baby was premature and had to stay at the hospital and all that sort of thing. And they were a little concerned about what was going to happen when they brought the baby home and how the cat would respond. And they did a really good thing in that they brought the swaddling, the blanket that the baby was in the hospital. They brought that home for the cat to sniff, so that the cat got used to the scent of the baby, and then they very gradually and carefully introduced the baby to the cat. Well, this baby, part of the therapy for a child with Down syndrome, especially a baby, is to get the baby to move his head and to lift his head and to track. Well, this cat seemed to sense that, and he would walk in front of the baby back and forth, and the baby would have to get so fascinated that he would lift his head and track the cat.
Aww.
And the cat would come to the baby's bedside and just, play, let the baby pull on his tail, and none of this is natural instinct for a cat.
Right, right.
And the child was just so fascinated with this cat named Toby, and Toby had so much patience with this little boy that they really feel, and even the people who came to help them with the child felt that the cat was helping David to meet those milestones that he needed to meet in order to be able to function.
Amazing. It's amazing. I mean, there's just this instinctive, reaching out and helping a child who needs it. Alan, how about you? You've got, what's one of the most unusual stories in the book? There were a lot of them for me.
Well, they're all wonderful stories. I love every one of them, but there was one that I kind of, it wasn't necessarily, well, it was unusual because it came from an 11-year-old girl. She sent it to us without even her mother knowing about it. It was all very sweet because she was very much on top of this because she was going to be an author, a published author, and she wanted to get her story into the book. So she sent us a story about her experience when she was in third grade, and she was, being bullied, and there was actually some pushing. And
Bella made me forget the bullies.
Exactly. She was just the sweetest girl, and she had a whole bunch of problems in school, and people were whispering and laughing at her. But after school, she went to her weekly riding session with a quarter horse named Bella. And at that moment when she got on that horse, she was able to tell Bella all about it. They were just connected on such a deep, wonderfully, some would say spiritual healing level, where she could talk about these issues, these problems that she had during the day. And by the time she finished her ride and all the expressions and all the emotions that came out, she was back to being, just a little girl, confident and able to go back to school with her head high and be able to face the day because Bella gave her that.
Well, you have a lot of stories about horses and children with autism, and I think we underestimate this powerful connection between horses and man across the board. I mean, I've seen, I know that horses work with people who are adults who are drug addicts or recovering alcoholics or recovering addicts. But there's a lot of work that horses do with autism. Can one of you talk about that for a second? Because this is huge stuff.
It really is. I mean, it's been amazing to us to see the way that these horses, they're so sensitive and and intuitive. And then when you have a child who has such difficulties with sensory input, they get overwhelmed very, very fast. And one of the stories that was really interesting was about a little boy who really hadn't spoken yet. The story is called "The Horse Who Heard Christopher's First Words."
Yes.
And this woman, Deb Hoyt, had said that she would help the mother, Christy, work with this little boy, Christopher. And she introduced him to the horse, and things seemed to be going pretty well. He was starting to respond, but he had been a very angry child because he was frustrated because he couldn't communicate. And eventually, though, they took him someplace where he rode a bigger horse.
Right.
And then he wouldn't have anything to do with the little horse that they had started working with. And finally, they figured out that the movement of the bigger horse was actually more stimulating to his brain, and somehow, instinctively, he knew that the bigger horse was better for him, and so he switched horses, and then eventually he said his first words as he was working with Deb, and the story tells about how the time then he looked up at Deb and said, "I love you, Deb."
Aww.
And that was just
he hadn't spoken, really. He wasn't very good at communicating, right?
No, he couldn't communicate hardly at all, and he really made tremendous progress.
So, and I think we're seeing more work in the equine therapy world in all different ways. And I think I've always loved horses. So, rode them from the time I was a little girl. Don't ride them so much now, but I mean, I've always loved horses. So, I'm glad to see this happening. And it's just, I think the therapy, when you could be outside and you're with an animal and there's that connection, it's just so important. One of my favorite stories is Katie the Golden Retriever. And Katie the Golden Retriever is a pretty remarkable animal. But I really like this whole idea of the READ program and how magically this works for children who are so afraid to read out loud or, don't know how to communicate. Can you just talk about that for a second, Alan?
It is interesting. Katie, we've had a lot of work with READ dogs over the years when they come to our book events or whatever, and we have children and actually go through the example of what they do. And often in these READ dog situations where they come in, the child really does read and focus, and the dog does focus on the child, and it's just a beautiful relationship that's developed in those moments when the child is reading and having all the confidence being built because the child is very much enmeshed or wanting to continue because there's all this positive reinforcement.
Yeah, so what happens to these children is that they don't know how to read, they're afraid to read, and then when the dog is there, they actually start reading to the dog, right? Let's talk about that more on the other side of the break. I'll be right back. You're listening to the Cindy Laverty Show. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Cindy Laverty, and if you're like